Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety. Today, we're joined by Melanie Wilson, a grief advocate, creative ritual designer, and community builder who works at the intersection of death, mourning, and grief.
After experiencing profound loss, Melanie began reimagining what it means to grieve, not as something we do alone or numbed with alcohol. She explores how art, ritual, and connection can help us navigate grief in more holistic, inclusive ways. Melanie, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So what was your earliest experience with loss, and how did it shape the way you understand life and connection?
Yeah, absolutely. I was fortunate not to be very young when I had my first loss of someone close to me, which was my uncle. Um, but I would say that after that, I was probably like seventh or eighth grade. And then after that, there was my grandmother, and then from that, I didn't have much loss until I was in my 20s, and I was traveling, and I had a couple of losses while I was away. So once with a stranger, being with them as they took their final breaths, conscious breaths, I should say. And then the following year was actually a friend and colleague who also had I had the same experience with. And then the third year in a row was my father. So uh, I really look to those three experiences that happened in a row that to uh, kind of see that shaped my journey into finding community within grief and the death space as well.
That's a lot of loss kind of in a row.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so Melanie, when we spoke before, you kind of look at yourself as a griever who's creating community. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I noticed during my own experiences that even with a loving and close family, that having other people outside of my family who could kind of be in community with me and understand the losses that I had was really important to me, because I needed community. I needed to be with people who were okay with talking about it. And
Mm.
um, so to be able to be with other people who understand something kind of similar, and being able to create space together was really important to me. So I ended up finding it by creating it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What beliefs about grief did you grow up with? And did you have to unlearn any of those beliefs?
Yeah, I would say that, interestingly, the belief that I hear a lot of people talk about is that everyone grieves differently. And I
Mhm.
think that I kind of challenge that in the sense where, yes, there's a lot of difference in grief, but I think that holds people back from thinking that then they can hold other people in grief. So I really like to highlight that we also grieve the same, because how could we even find community if we're all just grieving in such different ways, right? Because the problem with grief is not the grief itself. It's more so the isolation that comes with
Yeah.
it. And I think that that belief of, well, everyone grieves differently. So, you can't kind of touch and be part of that grief is the part that makes people kind of closed off to that idea. But when you put together a public event and 20 something strangers come and then they want more, to me, that shows me that we can
Yes.
grieve together and collectively. And I know that it has been something, that has happened in history a lot. So it's changed over time in history. And I really personally see that the kind of moving back to the idea of community is really important for grievers.
Mhm. Mhm.
When did you first realize that, Melanie, that creative public expression of grief could change the way people heal?
So I was part of an organization, or I still am part of an organization called the Dinner Party. Um, and they are a platform to put together peer supporting groups. It's not really support groups, it's more like just peer grief groups who hold each other and kind of don't hide the hard things around grief and specifically the loss of someone significant in their life. And so that was really that really helps me shape and or show me that I had kept looking for community in the different experiences that I had in grief. And then from there, I since I had joined them kind of right before and then during the pandemic, it was very much a virtual experience in that
Mhm.
community. And I really wanted in person. I come from an events background and really appreciate the energy that I can have from other people, whether it's in a grief space or just in any kind of event space. So I ended up wanting to just see if other people would be interested in getting together around grief. And because I was looking for that in general when I had moved to New York City after my father's death. I had ended up in a couple of different spaces, different kind of, because I'm from the queer community. I was at queer mixers, and people would ask me why I moved to New York City. I would tell them because of my dad's death, and there was always a little bit of an awkward situation when people didn't know what to do with that. And I also knew that when I did talk to someone who could understand me, it was such an important connection that that's when I was like, okay, I'll just kind of see if other people have the same experience as me. And sure enough, they did. And um, I didn't, I didn't mean for it to be specifically talking about grief only.
Mhm.
I kind of left it open to if people didn't want to talk about their grief and things like that, they could just show up and know that that is a commonality between us. And it ended up being where people really did want to talk about it because they just needed an invitation to share it and talk about it. And after the first mixer, it kind of went from there and took on a life of its own with just some different ideas around creativity and kind of learning about what other people do in grief and bringing that to an event space.
So what does it feel like to be the death of the party, and how did that phrase inspire the work that you do?
Yeah, yeah. So that that was really when I would show up at events and tell my truth about my experience. And I found myself once in a while kind of just saying when I could tell that someone wasn't open to it, I would
Mhm.
kind of just say like, "Oh, someone significant in my family had died." And I didn't love saying that. I didn't love feeling that way because usually I'm pretty open to it. Like I remember going out there and being able to say it. So once in a while when I felt that way, I was like, wow, like I'm going to put a damper on it because I'm going to have to say to this person, oh no, it's okay. When when they say, oh, I'm so sorry, or like something like that, right? And I just want to like continue on with my story or something that way. And I think that it's really important for folks to be able to be their authentic self and show up in the way that they are because they are who they are and their experience is what it is. And I don't want people to hide that part of themselves. So that's kind of where I see the death of the party
Yeah.
piece of it.
Yeah, I love that expression. That's thank you for sharing that.
I've been saying it all week since I started like working on the episode. I kind of love it. So, Melanie, you focus on the living as much as you do on the dead. So, how do you see grief as a part of life rather than just a response to death?
For sure. So the relationship that you're carrying after someone has died. So it's not that they are gone and no one is thinking about them, even though folks, get concerned that if they bring up the death of someone, that they're going to remind someone else of that death. And but the truth is grievers are always thinking about
Mhm.
it. And um so I really think that that grief is just kind of how that relationship continues along.
I think that's really an important point, and one it's interesting, like, I recently talked to my partner about this because my dad died last September, so a year ago September, and then my grandmother died just 5 months after him, and they were the 2 most important, closest people in my life. And what I was saying to my partner is it feels really hard because he never ever brings up my dad or my grandmother, and either do you actually, Sonia. We've talked about this a
No,
little
that
bit.
Melanie and I talked about this. This is why I wanted the episode because I was not a good grief ally to you. And so it had a lot to do with why I wanted to do the
Nice,
episode
that's
because
nice.
I remember telling her, I was like, I just didn't know what to do or say.
So I was telling my partner this example of there's, like, a woman in our community who lost her son, to cancer, a few years ago. He was 14, really kind of recognized, like, hockey player in our community, and Um, she posted on our community Facebook page because someone and this has happened, I've seen her also walk on the trails, and someone stopped her and said his name and was just asked, about him, and she was so grateful because she was like, "I think about him all the time," and it's the same for me. I think about my dad, my grandmother all the time, and I said to my partner, you're not, because he was like, "Oh, I don't wanna, like, make you sad," and I'm like, "It's not gonna make me sad, and even if it does, like, that's okay. That's not it feels so much worse to feel like I can't talk about them."
Absolutely. I think that having been now in a lot of different event spaces, but different kind of opportunities with community, really that invitation is what people need because they also grievers feel like they're putting this burden on someone else. If they're like, "Hey, can I talk about my dead person?"
Yeah.
Um, which is why like being together in grief and having uh that same knowing together is important and kind of helping each other realize that that's okay to do
Mhm,
together and that that will be celebrated together for sure. But yeah, just
mhm.
having someone kind of help remember them is important for sure.
So, I guess this question kind of relates to that, but how does your approach challenge the idea that we should just move on or find closure?
Yeah, for sure. So because I see grief as a relationship, I
Mhm.
I mean as much as some folks move on from relationships and things like that, I think that it also invites the idea that you can continue it, right? It's going to be in a different form. You're going, if you'd like to nurture it, you can do so with your own personal traditions and rituals and things like that. And then also the same way that you'd like talk to your friends about when things are hard in a relationship or things are interesting in a relationship
Mhm.
or kind of, memories of relationship. You can do that too with the person that you've lost through your grief. And grief will always just kind of come in waves about, you'll be happy, you'll be sad, and that's okay.
In the therapy world, I did my practicum at a hospice, so I worked with grief a lot. And in the therapy world, we would call it continuing bonds.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
awesome.
Yeah, continuing bonds because it's true, the relationship doesn't end or doesn't have to end, and I think that's like a really important piece.
For sure. I'm going to have to
Mhm.
write that down.
So speaking of death of the party and other cool phrases, how Melanie, can you tell us just a little bit about death of the party and then also like how you why you think that art and creativity are such a powerful tool in expressing grief?
Absolutely. So, death of the party, the first mixer that I had was now 2.5 years ago in New York City. And since we've been part of and had and hosted our own events, I think we've had now 15 plus events. And they, like I said, they've kind of taken form in all different ways because as a exploratory event planner, I love doing different things, and I love kind of seeing what people will be able to respond to and communicate with, and kind of be able to bond over. I think that it's important for, especially with grief, but just in general as an events person, to not go into an event thinking that you have it all planned out and everyone's going to act accordingly. And that's the same with grief. So I have kind of taken the different paths based off of what has happened at previous events. So we've done things from just a chill mixer to a mixer, and going to a show that is, I think it was a 3-person play called My Mother's Funeral. And we got folks together beforehand. They were given some prompts to be able to respond to, literally prompts on the wall of a cute little bar under the theater. And the prompts kind of were from the show. Then we saw the show, and then we did a talk back with the actors as well as each other. So that's one of the events we've done. We've done a showcase of people of all different folks from the community who um, have put together performance art based off of their grief. So we had musicians, we had poetry, we had spoken word, and of course, some comedy. There's actually a comedy show that I'll be uh, kind of helping with sponsoring on actually tomorrow as well, which is called Dead Parent Society. And then I've also done some events around actually taking an art tour of the Met Museum here in New York City based off of grief. So taking 5 different pieces of art that were inspired by grief, and with an art educator, my friend Deborah, because I am not an art educator. We put together a group experience to really talk and discuss that. And I would say, yeah, most of the time art is part of it, because of the fact that art allows people to kind of have an expression, and we're not just sitting them down and saying, let's talk about your grief. Instead, they're able to explore to get to that expression of art and expression of their grief along the way.
Mm.
I love that. And so, because we are sisters in sobriety, um, we've talked about art therapy and
Uh,
different ways to kind of move from our typical like numbing behaviors
Yeah.
to more expressive behaviors. But a lot of people turn to alcohol to cope with loss. And I think it's
Absolutely.
something we almost like, yeah, we see in like pop culture and we don't really think much of it. It's kind of the same thing even to cope with like a breakup, right? It's like, let's drink a bunch of wine and eat
Mhm.
ice cream. So how have you seen this or have you seen it play out? And how do you feel like you're offering a different path other than numbing?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I would say maybe a couple of the events have been in places where alcohol has been at least offered. And I haven't seen people gravitate towards that. And also, even in the settings that I've done events with partners, we haven't really thought that that was necessary because of that fact of like the numbing and the idea that you might not feel super authentic in that place. Grief and conversations around death are uncomfortable and they're also desirable. So I think people do, if they're given that invitation and they're actually coming out right to experience this together, they're looking for something real and they're looking for a place to be expressive and to not have kind of that inhibitor along the way. Um, it's vulnerable for sure.
Mhm.
And it takes someone being able to kind of look inside themselves and say, "Hey, that's for me." And I have had a couple of times where people have said, "You know what? I realize that I'm too close to what just happened." Like sometimes people will come weeks after a death and I don't think I could do that myself.
Mhm, mhm.
So I appreciate that sometimes, it's not the right thing for them in that moment and finding different ways to cope. People will always do that. And I think that at the events, we give them other ways to cope and to really dive into and explore and express grief. So we're not just kind of sitting there and people are like, "What should I do? Maybe I'll pick up a glass."
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, this explore and express grief leads me to my next question, which is about rituals. And I love actually talking about this. So, what role do rituals l- have or play in helping people process grief? And I'm wondering if you can give some examples of what rituals might be.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first kind of started learning about um, death education in the grief space, also, I was very opposed to the word rituals. I think that it's a supercharged word for people who may not see it as something that they can own themselves, right? It might be something that is specifically tied to religion or is tied to this idea of just my morning ritual of a coffee cup and things like that, right? There are different ways that the word has been used. And I know that if someone had come to me when my father had first died and said, "Let's think about rituals," I'd be like, "Don't talk to me about that." So I really wish that there was another word for it. I'm still working on it. And which I sometimes do like to think about the word like a new or the idea of a new tradition, like your own
Mhm.
tradition. So to get past that piece, um, I definitely think that even just getting together with my dinner party folks, so the folks who I've met through the organization, that we have dinner once a month together, that is a ritual because we are able to come together as a community and be able to express our grief together. Then there are more creative, or I would say that's pretty creative, but other creative rituals, something like when so my logos include bees because I'm a beekeeper. And people sometimes decide that their ritual is something along the lines of beekeeping or tending a garden where they're able just to focus in on what they what expression that they want to do in that moment, to think about the person that they have lost, and their grief, and they might be comforted by the idea of thinking about what that person would be doing if they were here, or more so, they might be comforted by memories and things like that. I also, I'm a funeral and memorial celebrant, so I help people to put together unique ceremonies that are not necessarily religious or spiritual, but a way to send off their loved one. And in those ceremonies, there are rituals that can come about that are really geared towards the uniqueness of the person. So, for instance, in someone might light a specific candle, and that's something that we did for my sister-in-law who we lost earlier this year. We have a candle, and it was just her birthday, and my partner also lit the candle, and like that will be our ritualistic candle for her. So it doesn't need to always be like this grand ritual. It can be as simple as lighting a candle. It can be as simple as eating someone's favorite birthday cake on their birthday, just an expression that feels, once again, an extension to a relationship and feels authentic to that person that you've lost.
For sure. I eat fish and chips on my dad's birthday now. That's like a new ritual
I love
because
it.
that was his favorite. And
Yeah.
my grandmother knit me a meditation shawl. So I make sure I wrap that around myself every day when I meditate. So I feel like
Oh, wow. That's
those are
gorgeous.
rituals in
Yeah,
a sense.
absolutely. Yeah,
And also lend itself to that continuing bonds or that relationship with the people who
for
have
sure.
passed.
I'm dating somebody who lost his dad last year, and he says that his relationship with his dad is stronger
Mm.
now than when he was alive. And first I thought, that's creepy. And the more I get to know him and he talks about it, it's like really beautiful, right? And so, speaking of all these things, how do you balance the pain of the grief with that possibility of joy or celebration in remembrance? Like, I'm assuming, Kathleen, when you say like you eat fish and chips and you like wrap the shawl, like you're not sad when you're
No,
doing these things, right? And
no,
so,
no.
yeah, Melanie, can you talk about that a little bit? It's how do you balance that pain? Or are there days, Kathleen, for example, where you're like, this, I can't do this. Like today, I cannot wrap the shawl. Like it doesn't feel right, or it hurts too much, or, that type of thing.
I think, like, if there are days that I'm really sad about my grandmother, it brings me comfort to do that, not more sad.
Yeah, that's really interesting for sure. I would say so I probably found music to be the hardest thing to deal with when it came
Yes.
to my dad's death. He was not a
Mhm.
musician, but was he somehow he kind of remembered everything that he ever consumed or read or things like that. And so he did listen to music in a very different way than I personally listen to music. And I think a lot of people do. So I would say he would listen to music in a way that likely a musician would. And so it was really hard for me to listen to, the music that we would listen to together. And I found myself gravitating towards music that he had never listened to. Especially when I wasn't in a place that I could really think about, if that makes sense, like working or,
Mhm.
and like running out of a store if there was a song that was just too much for me. And I remember also right after his death, the the new version, I think it was the Whitney Houston version of Higher Love came out on the radio, and the original Steve Winwood version was like very powerful to me and made me think of my dad before he had died. So I remember being like, this, I have to turn this off, things like that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to feel the pain, which is why I think that, like I said, it takes it takes you kind of being intentional if you're coming to an event like death of a party that there's going to be some uncomfortable moments. A lot of people cry at them and they're like, they literally say, I didn't expect to cry. And I'm like, yeah, like I can understand it's super uncomfortable to cry in
Yeah.
front of a bunch of strangers. And it I don't tell people that it's gonna be a safe space because I don't know if they feel safe talking about it. I think it's more of a braver space, right? They're being brave in that moment to decide that they're gonna be there. And I can't take that pain away. And I also think that it's important to be in places where you ultimately are gonna feel that pain because it's either gonna come out in a
Mhm.
different way as kind of we were talking about with numbing before, right? Like you can't always suppress it. So nurturing it in ways that you can get through that moment or that few moments is is important to grief. And
Mhm.
then in other places you'll feel really excited once again to like be brought back to that, right? So now 6.5 years after my father's death, it's a lot easier for me to listen to that music.
Mhm.
And I'll still feel sad in some ways. And then I'll also be happy because I'll be like, oh, someone else might be also listening to this song.
Mhm.
Um, and I would love to share that. So last year on his 5th year death anniversary, I did a commemoration ceremony. And that happened after I, for 6 months, was talking to his network and kind of learning different things that I didn't know about him. I put out a call to all these folks because I hadn't talked to most of them since his funeral. I didn't know his colleagues myself. And 5 years later, I was ready to talk to people who I wanted to have a connection with, but I didn't know if they were still thinking about him. And it was really beautiful to be able to talk to other once again, his colleagues and some of his family members, but I would say his colleagues were the ones who really, like, came out in droves. And and they were like, "Yeah, like, we still remember him. Here's this story. Here's that story." And that was so amazing, and that didn't hurt at all.
Mhm.
Whereas I know, like, the funeral or our memorial, because he wasn't there, it wasn't a traditional funeral. His body wasn't there because we had donated his body to science, and that takes a few months to get cremated remains back. But at his memorial, I we have it recorded, and I don't have any interest in watching it again
Mhm.
because it was so painful. But the commemoration 5 years later, I love, and I've watched a couple of times, and like because together, I was able to kind of take that pain and also learn a lot more about my dad.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. What do you think it means to be a grief ally?
Yeah, so I would say that grief allyship is folks who understand how to hold someone in their grief and how to hold space, whether it's holding space together or kind of separately for a griever. So it's someone who's not asking or saying the terrible things, or if they are saying like the wrong thing, they're admitting it or understanding and learning through it. Because we also, as grievers, I I think we're like, well, that was the wrong thing, right? And like,
Mhm.
of course, there's nothing right technically to say when things are that terrible. So being able to acknowledge like I may not know what to say or I may not know, but I'm here to be with you and to offer you what I can.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, what are some common mistakes? I'm sure I made them all, that people make when trying to comfort someone who's grieving? Like, is there a type of are there types of language that are helpful, not helpful when you're speaking to someone in grief?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of back to the idea of the relationship piece. Um I think that is a helpful way for a grief ally or someone who hasn't gone through grief, but even they might have not gone through it recently. Because I see other grievers say the wrong thing too. Like it is what it is. And so thinking about the fact that it is a relationship, that if you're a sensitive person to your friends in general, not asking or saying the things that you would say even if the person was alive, right? So things like, you know, asking someone, well, were they close? It doesn't really matter if they were close, right? You still lost someone. So having having the person who wants to be an ally trying to like measure up if this pain is painful enough, unnecessary. Um saying things like, well, I know your dad would want you to be happy. It's like, would you? Do you know that?
Mhm.
I think that type of phrase is very needs to be saved for the people who are really close to both the griever
Mhm.
and the person that they lost. Um, and things like they're in a better place, right? If someone actually believes that, if the griever actually believes certain things, that might be comforting to them, but it's about the griever, right? And what they believe. It shouldn't be about the grief ally at that
Mhm.
point, and what they believe, because in that moment, you're not gonna turn them into something to believe something that they don't actually believe.
How can how can storytelling help people integrate and make sense of their loss, and how can a grief ally help them do that?
Yeah, so I love the idea of asking about the life,
Mhm.
because a death, depending on obviously how long someone was actively dying, someone might have been sick, and there's always time and place to talk about the death. And most of the time people will ask that, right? Like, oh,
Mhm.
how did they die? Um, what happened? Once again, were they sick for a long time? How old were they? All of those types of kind of
Mhm.
questions. But if you can be a grief ally and turn those into questions about the person's life, because they were likely, a certain amount of years prior to that
Mhm.
death, right? There's a certain amount of time of death, but then there's a lot longer of a life for the most part, depending on the situation. Being able to ask about that and to share about that, that's going to be something, once again, that people want to talk about. So they do want to talk about their grief, but likely that's going to take shape of actually talking and telling stories about that person's life. So asking questions about, even when, like, if you're spending time with your friend who is grieving someone, being able to be like, hey, would like, what would your dad think about this, right? So for instance, instead of saying like your dad would want you to be happy, be like,
Mhm.
would your dad like this new house that you chose, right?
Mhm.
Or would
Mm.
your what would your dad say? Um, or what has your dad said about, the previous houses that you lived in, that sort of thing, right? So being able to just be inquisitive so that a griefer can actually answer with a story as opposed to just being told like
Mhm.
he'd want you to be happy. That's fine.
Mhm.
Yeah, that sounds like amazing advice. So, Melanie, as we wrap up, for those who are afraid to face their grief, what's one small step you suggest they can take?
Yeah. I mean, I am, as I've said, a pretty big advocate for finding a grief community. There are a lot of different grief communities online. I am actually in the process of doing starting some events online as well. But just being kind to yourself. You don't have to show up to a grief event every month, week, 2 months, uh, but just kind of giving, having, as a griever, giving yourself some space to do exploring and think about how your grief is manifesting, thinking about it in a way where it's like, okay, I might not be an event person, and that's totally fine. I might not be a community person. So, what is a way that I can give myself some time with some pain and do a ritual instead of just kind of sitting there, right? So, being able to light a candle, put a shawl around you when you're
Mm.
meditating. Um, Once again, eating something that the person that you're missing would have eaten with you or eaten specifically on their birthday. So giving yourself kind of an opportunity, a ritual, or just a moment in time where you're doing something intentional to think about your grief and give space to that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Melanie, for joining
Oh,
us today. It was a pleasure to have you. And I think our listeners will know a lot more now about how to be a grief ally. And those who are experiencing grief, um, I think it helped normalize some things for them. And also, you've given some great tips about how people can be with their grief and continue the relationship with the person that they've lost. So thank you.
thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us for Sisters in Sobriety, and we will see you next week.
This was Sisters in Sobriety.
Thank you for listening and being with us today.
If you want to learn more about sobriety and meet your community, find us at sistersinsobriety.substack.com.
Are you a sister in sobriety? Then reach out on social media. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're feeling generous, leave us 5 stars and a review and follow us wherever you listen.
You'll never miss an episode. Until next time.